Hi guys, what is up? My name is Miles, and today I'm going to show you how I animate. This project is going to condense the entire process down into a small bite-sized portion for you to see from the beginning all the way up to the end. So make sure to stick around till the end to see how things turn out. Alright, let's get into it. Step 1 of the process begins right here in a program called Mischief. This is where I do my preliminary sketches. And normally I open the program and go right to work. Okay, that was a lie. Actually, I normally open this program and stare at the blank canvas for a while going, what am I doing with my life? And after I'm done having a little crisis, I settle down and I start to work. Then it is my job to create a very rough sketch of whatever character I'm going to be animating. This is going to include their body, accessories, hair, and clothes. Once I feel like that looks halfway decent, I go, okay, I'm going to roll with this, and I move on to the next step. Then I go ahead and export that project and move it over to Krita. Now I do most of my preliminary sketches in Mischief because it has an endless canvas and I can do whatever I want, but Krita is where I usually complete my final designs. So once I move that project over, I begin making pieces. Now for me to animate any character, that means they have to be chopped up into pieces. And no, I'm not a psychopath, but just keep watching the screen. This is what it looks like. And the purpose of this is to give me multiple different pieces that I can move throughout my project. A normal character can have anywhere from 10 to 20 moving parts. It just depends on how much you want to animate and where you like to move things. Now I say animate loosely because I actually more often than not use a process called Tweening. If you'd like to hear more about that, it will be down in the description, but for right now we're just going to stick to the process. Okay, let's move on. Once I finish drawing all my pieces to my liking, which normally takes quite a while, it's time to move on to the next step in the process. I export all of my pieces and save them to a file that I'll be able to easily find later on. Sometimes this means using multiple folders, but usually I do one folder per character, with all their pieces inside. Then it's time to open a wonderful program that I adore called Moho, or in its recent past, Anime Studio. Not entirely sure why they changed the name, I actually like the previous name better, but that's not what this video is about. Back to the process. After I have opened the lovely Moho, I go ahead and just slap all my pieces in there no matter what sort of order they're in. Then take the rest of my time organizing them. And yes, in case you're asking, everything has to be perfect. It's one of my weaknesses. Moving on! After everything has been organized appropriately, it's up to me to play with the scale of it. Do I want my character front and center? Do I want them kind of off to the side? Do I want them in the background, the foreground? And yes, this is all very important, but this is also sort of me getting ahead of myself because right now there is no background, foreground, any ground. No worries, that's coming. But rewind, let's stick with the process. Once I have sized my character correctly, then it is on to the most important step of all, which is bone rigging. And yes, it has a lot to do with bones and rigging, as you might have already guessed. Yeah, okay, focus. Let's get back to it. In the process of bone rigging, I basically draw bones inside of the pieces that I want to be able to move. This way it allows me to manipulate them at different angles and at different portions. And yes, this is a lot of fun, and sometimes I stay here and I do stupid stuff with my characters, you know, just because I can. This process usually takes a good while, and sometimes you even have to go back and erase stuff because you don't like the way that it manipulates each of your layers. But that aside, once I'm finally done, it usually looks something like this. This is normally part of the process where I save like literally every 2 seconds. Because one thing you do not want to have to deal with is re-rigging all of your bones because something stupid happened. Like the dog, deciding that he wants to lie on top of the extension cord, thus pulling it from the wall. Or a summer storm rolling on in and shutting the power off. Like, even before the storm hits. And yep, that happens in my area. Often. So you get the point, I save a lot during this part of the process. Once the saving frenzy has more or less calmed down, I begin to work on the background. And this is, yes, arguably one of my favorite parts of the project because it allows you to really create the scene. In this stage, I'm choosing what I want in the foreground, what I'd like in the background, how they're going to situate around my character, what elements I want to be animated, and what elements I don't mind having static. The more layers that you have on a project that are animated, the longer it's going to take to render. So if you've got layers that you don't mind being static, that really helps the process. Not everything has to move in an animation, contrary to popular belief. Static layers play just as much of a part as animated layers do. and they work hand in hand. Once I have my background pieces in place, I usually ask the program to create what is called a preview, which just tells us what it's going to look like when it's finally rendered. So they'll take one still shot, or one frame if you will, from your animation and show it to you as if it was already rendered. This is like super ridiculously important because as you can see, the animation right now, even while it's not moving, looks really like grainy and the lines are all squiggly. Okay, to say it nicely, it looks like trash. All right, it looks like trash. But when you ask the program to render a frame, it'll show you what it'll look like when it doesn't look like trash, i.e. when it's finished. This is super helpful because sometimes it gets very depressing looking at things and wondering, gosh, what is it going to look like when I'm finished, and when will I ever see the light at the end of this long, lonely animation tunnel? This also is super helpful because it lets me know which layers may not be optimized. So even if they look a slight bit fuzzy after the final render, it means that they might not have a high enough resolution to work in this project, in which I'll usually switch them out or draw something new. Once I've sorted all of that out, I move on to putting bones inside of every element I want to move. And while that's slightly different from with characters, it follows the same principles. Any angle I'd like to turn or any item I'd like to bend is an item I put bones inside, and it becomes a rig of its own. Then I work on the animation for items without bones, so items I just like to slide, stretch, or move up and down. In this case, it happens to be these background pieces with clouds on them. Gosh, you have no idea how many times I've used these backgrounds. A lot. In fact, if you go back and watch my projects, I'm sure you could probably find a handful. Reusing items absolutely makes things easier. Once I'm done messing around with the background, it's finally time to do what I find to be arguably the most tough portion of the entire process. And that is making this character come to life. Now, there are many ways to study animation, but I've always just found out that if I play around long enough, I'll usually find something that looks semi-natural, and then I can perfect that over time. So really, this part of the process is more or less me just playing with the bones in each of my layers and seeing what works. And if I have any doubts, I take reference pictures of myself, or I will try to replicate the motion on film and then study that film. Yeah, it's not maybe the easiest or most comfortable thing, and if you look on my phone, you might be rather surprised to find all the pictures and photos of me doing, well, poses and stuff. But it is very helpful when you don't have other references and you need to think of something quick. And yes, this is advice I give out because when all else fails, you always have yourself. That's one resource they can never take away from you. Ever. Once I am done with that sort of play around stage, I start to focus on which layers I want to have looped, which motions I'd like to have repeated, which layers I want to move independently, and which layers I want to have move as a group. And this just involves a lot of me pairing layers together, separating layers, or grouping a bunch of different layers into a big family. And when I'm finally happy with that, it usually looks something like this. Then it's up to me to look at each frame, make sure I haven't missed anything important, make sure my looping cycles are on time, make sure my background looks good, nothing's overlapping or overpowering, and all of the scenes seems to work together more or less like this. Then the moment of truth, when I hit that very stress-inducing button that says export, and the rendering process begins. Now that can take anywhere from 5 minutes to 10 minutes. It just depends on how crazy your animation is, how many layers you have, and how long you've made the entire animation. But once you're finally done with that, and you're happy with what you see and don't have to go back to the drawing board and change something, which literally never happens. The first render, at least for me, is always one that I have to go back and change at least one element in. But once you're done with that, the final product is finally finished, and you can finally watch it and put it to music and create something that finally looks like it works together, at least mostly. I use a lot of finallys when I'm finally finished because it just feels so good to finally be done. And boom, that is the process from start to finish with absolutely nothing left out. Okay, I might have left out a few breakdowns here and there, but that's not important. What is important is that at the end of the day, whatever you see in front of you is something that you like enough to live with yourself. And yes, I like this, at least for the next, half hour. But then watch, believe me, if I come back to this project, I will find things to nitpick again and again and again. This is where I want to offer some advice for any other artists or animators out there. You're not always going to love what you see, and you are always going to be more critical than other people will. There are things that you're going to see right away that you're like, oh, I can't stand this, that other people won't even notice. You are your worst critic, so go easy on yourself. No one's perfect. And there is always more you can learn. That's what's so cool about the creative process. I'm always learning new art and animation techniques that seem to take my work to a new level that I didn't even think I could ever get to, honestly. But that's the great thing about art. It's constantly growing, changing, and moving, just like you do. So there you have it. What did you think? Are you an animator as well? Do you draw digital art? Is this similar to the process that you use? Am I using way too many programs? Would you like to use the programs I'm using? No worries. If you have any of these questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and like always, I will get to them as soon as I can. I'll also go ahead and add some information in the description for anybody who wants to learn more. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, and as always, stay awesome. Now, if you're sticking around, go ahead and take a look at my brand new outro in 5, 4, 3, 2...